Welcome, bienvenue, welcome to this Property Matters podcast. Of course, as per usual, Hamish McClay of Search Convey is our esteemed Lord and Master, and of course we're visited today by a stalwart of the channel, Rowan Waller of
Friend of the show.
Friend of the show, yes, of course. And today's title is all about information. I think we'd all agree. The title is, of course, Material Information Guidance is No More. It always worries me when information suddenly disappears. Hamish, would you explain a little bit more about that to our esteemed audience?
Well, yeah, I guess we've got to bring up the subject of EPS as well. The Home Information Pack, when brought in the early part in the early part of this century, sounds as though we're ancient, doesn't it? Century. So it was brought out in the early part of this century for good reason, because it was felt that information would be useful for a buyer, and also for solicitors to get working on. But there were all sorts of different reasons. I didn't know what it was about because they'd started working on it before I even entered the field. So I knew nothing at the time anyway. Along came Home Information Packs, which we had to present because our operation's been going now since the early part of the century as well, and then they were withdrawn, and they caused actually a bit of a gap for some people, because some people praised them, some people hated them. The solicitors hated them because they didn't want to start work on that too early, and for whatever reason, there was enough swelling upsurge. So Grant Shapps, in his infinite wisdom, instead of giving his 100 days of discussion on the matter, decided he'd get rid of them overnight. But he got rid of squatters overnight and made all of those people homeless as well. So Grant Shapps didn't do a lot of people a lot of favours back then, really. So there wasn't any discussion about the matter. It just happened. But it did leave a vacuum. And this is what's happened again. What we did actually sort of find... the week before last, there was this announcement that the Law Society were withdrawing their. It was. I think it was in actual fact. It came from, as we were pointing out, it was the guidance was to be removed that had been sort of set up the previous year, and so without that guidance, where does that leave us?
Well, I think there's an old quote. I can't remember who it's from, but it says, "If we do not learn the lessons of the past, we will be seeking to repeat it." And it seems like this is a repetition. If you remove guidance, it removes a vacuum. Rowan, please explain.
Well, I think the first thing to understand is it's only the guidance that's been removed. The liability really hasn't been removed. So the guidance was under which act was it under? It was material information. It was parts A, B, and C. Okay, so it's been rolled out over the last couple of years, and it kind of gave estate agents a framework to provide this information. So what Hamish is talking about, the sort of information that was provided in the Home Information Pack that then wasn't wanted, it gradually became decided that this is actually information that the public should have, but the public should have it in advance of their decision making. So it shouldn't be that.
Sounds perfectly rational.
Absolutely, and it was rational, and it kind of aggravated a lot of estate agents, but actually it gave a lot of clarity. Even though it was arduous, it gave a lot of clarity about exactly what I say we as if I'm still an estate agent. I was an estate agent for a very long time, including when we were dealing with parts A and B and C. So we were then told exactly what we had to put in property particulars, in marketing material, what we should be telling people about, because it's no longer caveat emptor. It is it's providing material information to buyers so that they can make a decision. So if there's something that's going to affect their decision making, they should be told about it. And it said, this is all the stuff that you need to tell them, because this is all the stuff that we think is going to affect their decision making. Now, the principle of that hasn't disappeared. It's just now moved across to being governed by, who is it? Is it by the Digital Markets? It's by DMCC, I think it is. I can't remember exactly what it stands for now, and I really should have looked it up before the podcast. But it's just being governed and enforced by another body, whereas it was enforced by National Trading Standards, the State and Letting Agent Department. So that department, the National Trading Standards team, has pulled the material information guidance from their website. But that doesn't mean to say that the liability isn't still on the estate agent to be presenting this information to bewildered members of the public who, you know, could do with knowing whether a property's flooded. So,
are you referring to the DMCC bill?
The DMCC bill,
the
yes.
Digital Markets Competition and Consumers Bill?
Yes. So that is basically absorbing CPRS. So it's under CPRS that material information was came under. So consumer protection from unfair trading regulations moved us from the Property Misdescriptions Act of 1991 or whatever it was, where you weren't allowed to you can't call a 3-bedroom house a 4-bedroom house. Okay, so
you can't call your tiny cupboard a bijou property,
for example. So that would be a misdescription. But it didn't go far enough. So what it was allowing, essentially, what it was allowing was you could mislead by omission under the Property Misdescriptions Act. So CPRS was a more encompassing act that was more than just property, right? So the Property Misdescriptions Act was a specific property-related act, and then the industry became governed by a wider consumer protection bill that governed, you know, Sainsbury's would be governed by the same bill, right? So they could.
So far, I've had no issues with anything you said. It seems it's an evolution of property.
It's an evolution, and there's no real. So what hasn't happened is somebody saying in government, you don't need to worry about that anymore. All that has happened is the guidance has been removed from National Trading Standards, and that's confused people. So the liability is still there. It's going to be enforced by somebody else. And the DMCC, I think, perhaps goes slightly different territory to what the CPRS did, but overall it embodies what the spirit of what consumer protection regulations were is going to be embodied in the DMCC. Remind me what it is. I remember digital markets, and then I always forget.
Competition and Consumers Bill. Its main point, I was looking it up while you were talking, is strengthening consumer protection, cracking down on misleading advertising and hidden fees, making it easier to enforce rules against unfair business practices, and giving the Competition and Markets Authority a bit more teeth.
Yes, and it's that. So basically,
but it does seem. Hang on a moment. We had something before that helped the consumer stop people from bamboozling them. This thing sounds like it's pulled back so far. I know to encompass everything, but it's become a bit blasé and bleary and not really focused. Am I wrong in thinking that?
Shall I answer, or is that back to Hamish?
No, it's you.
So what we don't. So what we still have is consumers being protected. What we no longer have is a very specific guideline to estate agents to say this is exactly what you need to do.
All right.
That's the problem, because once you remove something that's black and white, that you can say, well, look, you didn't do that. Like you were told you needed to write this and this and this, and you didn't do that. Therefore, you're guilty of something.
Well, I'm a famously autistic gentleman. I love things black and white.
It's going to be open to interpretation. It's there's going to be regulatory scrutiny. So basically, what it does is it removes this sort of kind of certainty. Even though it was aggravating estate agents, they had this certainty of what they needed to do, and they were finding ways to do it. And there's lots of firms that have, grown ways to provide estate agents an easy way of providing all this information on their marketing material for a fee. So it's whether or not, those firms would be interesting to talk to, saying, well, what's your opinion of this now that you can't charge estate agents for all of this stuff anymore that gives them? But their answer would be exactly what I'm saying. They will say, well, estate agents do still need to produce this stuff, because it's still incumbent on the agent to be providing and not withholding any information that's going to make a material impact on a buyer's decision to proceed with something.
Yeah, that sounds very nebulous to me. Hamish.
It's nebulous, and that's a great word for it.
Thank you, Hamish. So now we understand completely how much we don't understand completely. How is this going to affect people. We've now got, it's not a watering down, it's a kind of like a mystification. It's all become a bit misty.
I think that is the challenge. It wasn't so much a regulation, but there was something there, and I think the key word there was Rowan that reminded us about it. It was the guidance which was actually removed, and without that guidance, it does leave too much interpretation to an individual. The good news, as Rowan has explained, there are a number of people put in place ways of gathering the appropriate material, the appropriate information that would be of great use to a buyer of a property.
Right.
And that is the guidance that's missing. However, because of the way it's actually been handled, there is nothing specific in place for the estate agents. Now, we know, like anything else, there are reputable lawyers, there are disreputable lawyers.
Oh, yes.
There are reputable estate agents, there are disreputable estate agents.
Oh, yes.
There are reputable gatherers of information like ourselves, us personal search agents. There are disreputable ones.
Look, our focus here on this channel has always been to try and uncover and provide information to help people make better decisions by being curious and asking questions and being open to critical thinking. But this seems to me a bit like saying, we're going to make you a soup and we're going to put vegetables in it, but we're also going to put 200 tons of water in there as well. So finding those vegetables is going to be a mission.
But I think this is the challenge. When we had the home information packs, that was something thou shalt have. So it was straightforward to handle.
Right.
When this particular sort of guidance, although it was criticised and disliked and was possibly interpreted incorrectly by the Law Society in the way in which they were trying to handle it, there was still that guidance that was there. Now we have people, we have the lawyers, we have the people buying the properties, we have the developers,
Right.
So much going on. And without that guidance, how can we assure that they get the appropriate information? And of course, that leaves, I don't know, because I mean, Rowan can possibly explain, where does that leave estate agents in the whole of this particular sort of situation? Do they still follow the guidance, all of them? Or are we back to where I said they can or they can't? It's up to them.
Well, I think,
in the words of Pink Floyd, have we become comfortably numb? sorry, I'm on one today. Carry on, Rowan. It does seem to me that if you're going to put everything into this morass and then make things even less easy to see, on the one side, you'll get people who take advantage of it negatively by using these blurred lines, another musical pun, to try and make people less able to see where the borders are. And the other part is it takes away that guidance that made it easier for people to do their job.
yeah, and I mean, I've featured on a podcast with you before. I think it was the Property Quorum, because Juliet was on it, and we were talking about material information as it was coming in, as parts B and C were being released. And the conversation we were having then was, why don't we just, to comply with material information, why aren't we just getting people to complete TA6? Because surely that's all of the information that people are going to require, right? I mean, and that's what it sort of boiled down to. So who is deciding what is materially important? And for example, I mean, Hamish has brought up HIPs, and I am old enough, as I was an estate agent and dealt with HIPs, and I was about the only estate agent I knew that enjoyed HIPs. I liked HIPs. I thought they were really useful. But what HIPs did that material information doesn't do is HIPs provided searches, because I can't see how there's an argument that what's going to come up in searches isn't going to be of material importance to somebody's decision to buy a property.
Oh, it's bloody essential.
It is, right? So at what stage does somebody is an arbiter of this and saying what is materially important? And the trouble with it not being tangible, the trouble with it not being written down, is that it becomes something that's arguable, right? So if I were an estate agent still, I would be saying, look, for now, guys, we just continue complying with what we were doing under material information, parts A, B, and C, because that somebody had decided that was all relevant stuff. Until somebody says it's not relevant, I think we have to assume it is relevant. But from a moral point of view, we get our moral compass out, and we come across
dear.
something that doesn't necessarily appear in material information A, B, and C, but that we think is going to be of material importance to a buyer. We should be talking about that. We should be telling a seller, this is something your buyer needs to know. And we should be then telling the buyer, this is something you should know before coming to view this property or putting your offer down on this property. Such and such has also taken place, which isn't the sort of thing that would necessarily come up in a form, but we think you might want to know about it. So
If I was being less generous and perhaps more cynical, I could say that getting your moral compass out and estate agents are potentially oxymorons. But anyway, moving on. However, no, of course not, because most estate agents are good people.
Most estate agents are good people. Most estate agents, though, effectively are marketeers. So they've gone into a sales job.
They're all marketers. That's their job, is to market.
And they've gone into something because they want to sell stuff. And now they're having to become all sorts of other things. Not least this week, they've become government agents in the terms of lettings, haven't they? With this introduction of financial sanctions checks. So estate agents and letting agents are being asked to do all sorts of things that was never on their agenda when they were 18 years old and they went on the job site and thought, oh yeah, that's quite interesting. I like looking around people's homes. And that's what they went into it to do. And now they've got to do all this other stuff as well. But, it's not bad stuff that they're doing. It's all makes sense. If you think of an estate agent as a consultant rather than a salesperson, then of course it's all the stuff that you should expect a consultant to be advising on.
Well, I suppose in many ways, as I've said before, it's a kind of evolution of process, yes? Whereas before you could just talk about this, now you're expected to talk about a bit wider picture. But also, it does irritate me that they had what seemed to be a workable framework that people were working with, post-hips and all the rest of that, and now they're taking away that and saying, don't bother that. There's somewhere in there. You don't know where, but it's somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Hamish, have you got any thoughts by which we could romp home today at this joyful podcast?
Well, just before I mention my last little bit of music, I think it is important to say there are solutions out there. There are people out there that can handle the solutions. It is interesting hearing Rowan's comments about what the estate agents were dragged in to actually be responsible for, because we have property lawyers in exactly the same situation. They set up to, this is absolutely great.
Right.
It works the same both ways. We're trying to get clients into their dream homes. And then all of a sudden, we're meant to be experts on flood risk and climate change and all of this. Well, hey, where did this come from? But it's their risk now. There's somebody suggesting that they're responsible for all of this. So there's the solutions out there, and it gives us a better chance, I think. Once the fact that we got off the ground to try and pull this information together, the fact that it's now being done, as Rowan explains, there are people who found the solution to this to get some of the right information. It's not going to take long to actually get there. But just as we depart, let me bring up a final bit of music from the Incredible String Band. Some of you may or may not. The
Incredible String Band. Good Lord. Go on.
That particular song was entitled Nebulous Nearnesses. And that was a beauty of a song. Look that one up on Spotify or YouTube.
Yeah, so we'll be on our YouTube later. Now, I just wanted to thank everybody for watching, and it's interesting, isn't it? It turns out that you need a compass to be able to navigate your way through today's mystery process. More of a mystery as guidance is randomly pulled or replaced. I think that it's a good idea that we look to our morals before we engage in these kind of shenanigans, and maybe more people should. And on that note, I thank you all for watching, and hope that you keep your feet on the ground, keep reaching for the stars. Who knows, you might catch the moon. And also try and look after that mental health. Until next week, goodbye.
Cheerio.